Welcome to Life Her Podcast, the podcast that guides you from the 9-to-5 grind to the freedom of your own path. Discover how to conquer life's challenges while pursuing your passions with unwavering faith. Because being an entrepreneur is not easy. So let's get to it.
Hey everyone, I am Yvette Lloyd, host of Life Her Podcast. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. Michael Hession, a distinguished physician and author of Physician Heal Thyself. With over 30 years of medical experience, Dr. Hession's journey took a profound turn after a near-death experience on December 31st, 2003. His story of survival, resilience, and transformation offers deep insight into the human spirit, the power of healing, and the intersection of medicine and personal faith. Join us as we explore his incredible journey and the lessons he's learned along the way. Hi, Dr. Hession. How are you?
Very good, Yvette. Thank you for having me as a guest on your show today.
Thank you for being on my show to be able to share your testimony, encourage others, inspire others, and just your resilience alone, just sharing it. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
So tell me first, what inspired you to write Physician Heal Thyself, and why is it important to share your simply deeply personal story?
That's an excellent question. It was January of 2020 during the pandemic. I was essentially confined to home. I just had my hip replaced and everything was shut down. And I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. And I cleaned out an old drawer by my nightstand and found a journal that I had kept when I was sick. And I started reading through it, and I realized that what I went through with my illness and being on life support was very similar to the stories that I heard on the television of many people who ended up in intensive care units with COVID pneumonia on ventilators and having a difficult time with the recovery. And I felt a need to do something. My son at that time was a resident in internal medicine in New York and was on the front lines of COVID in January of 2020. And I thought that by sharing my story of what it was like to have acute respiratory distress syndrome or cytokine storm, the prolonged experience of being on a ventilator, and the agonizingly long recovery, and what helped me get through that were lessons that I could share with other people, family members, as well as patients who are undergoing something similar. So I started writing it, and I spent most of many months. It was not an easy thing to relive all of that time in my life, but I thought there were a lot of lessons that I could share and to help normalize this, what it's like to have a critical medical illness and to bounce back and to rebuild a life that has meaning, purpose, and find happiness again. It was not the life I had before I was sick, but what I talk about in my book is how you can find meaning, purpose, and happiness again, even after life-altering illness.
Yeah, so when you were going through that illness and everything, did you find a different light to life and a different purpose in life for yourself to make many changes once you had got better?
Well, it was um, it was a slow process. Each day when I was acutely ill, just getting through the treatments and illness was something that just had to get through hour by hour. then once I was in rehabilitation, recovering and rebuilding my strength, I began to look back on what I had accomplished in my life and what the future held for me. And I found that there are things that I really enjoy doing. I really loved taking care of patients. I loved being a physician. It was and still is one of the greatest honors and privileges in life to be able to take care of another human being. And so I worked very hard to try to rebuild my life. And when I was recovering, one of my visitors came and said, "Well, did this make you angry, this illness?" I said, "No." Then he asked another question that really kind of had me think long and hard. Did it make you a better person? And I thought about that a lot, and I have to say it did. And going through an existential crisis where you nearly die is hard to really fathom. You can't really prepare yourself for something like that. But I found that if I focused on what was in my control, that was the way I got through my day. If I focused on the past, that which I didn't have, I would just get sad. And if I focused too much on the difficulty I was experiencing with my recovery, that I could really just get dragged down by that. So I had to look to the future and what my future life would be. And that's what I did. And it helped me a great deal. And it helped me to become closer to my wife and my children and my friends. It helped me to become a better physician and a better person. I learned firsthand what it was like to be on the other side of the bed. I can tell you from experience, it's a lot harder to be a patient than it is a doctor.
So what was there like a specific moment during your recovery that made you realize that you had to tell your story?
It was during the pandemic, and the nightly news just kept showing patient after patient, statistics after statistics of people who had acute respiratory distress syndrome, a cytokine storm, on ventilators, and having a very difficult time recovering. And they were lost. And it was looking at those shows that I realized that I could normalize that and help share what worked for me and hopefully help those people recover and their families recover. It's really not like any illness. It's really a life and death struggle, and many people did die. And the people who did recover and got off life support were faced with a very long and slow recovery, as I did. And it's bewildering because you're unable to do things that you took for granted before the illness. Just even breathing again without fear of struggling to breathe or having to go back on life support was a huge fear that I had to overcome. Learning how to swallow again, learning how to walk again. Those are all things that I never thought of before this illness. And they were real life problems that I had to face. And the amount of physical therapy that required was enormous. And it was slow and tedious. And as I said, I think the prime motivation was I felt like I needed to share my experience in order to help other people recover from the illness and help their loved ones to recover also. My wife wrote an afterword in what it's like to be the spouse of a patient who's critically ill and nearly dies.
Wow.
And I think the book has really resonated. A lot of people have reached out to me after reading it, and I've been invited on a number of podcasts, and I've been invited to do a lot of lectures at different hospitals and to different groups. And it's as I said, it was a difficult book to write. It was difficult dredging up um, the painful memories of what I went through, but I think it was important to. It was is my lived experience, and it was the lived experience that many others were going through, and it's bewildering. Um, you're unmoored from the life you knew before, and things that you took for granted, um, like breathing, like being able to move. You had to relearn, and um,
Yeah.
and that's what prompted me to write the story.
Wow. So, with you having a near death experience that changed your perspective on life and medicine, can you describe that moment on how it has reshaped you understanding the mortality of everything?
There was a moment, one point in my illness. I don't really remember the day. Time ceased to become a dimension when I was on life support. There was no night, there was no day, there was just one continuous period. And there were a lot of treatments that I had to go through. One of the most unpleasant was suctioning. And they place a tube down inside the tube that's going into your lungs to push the air, the oxygen into your lungs. And they thread it down deep into your lungs to suck out all the mucus and debris from the pneumonia. It's extremely unpleasant. It's like having the air sucked out of you. And one of those episodes, I don't remember waking up. Um, it was an odd sensation. I just felt my body become cold and that I was drifting away. And I could hear crying, mournful wailing going on. And I didn't know where it was coming from. And I kept drifting away. And I looked back and I could see it was my family. And then after a while, I drifted further and I could no longer see them or hear them.
Wow.
And I saw a white light. I was being slowly but definitely pulled towards that white light.
Wow.
After a while, the light took on the appearance of a woman in luminous white robes. And she said, "Michael, it is not your time. You
Wow.
must go back. There is much to do." And then I began to drift away. And the next thing I remember is my wife talking into my ear, and she was saying, "The doctors just gave us good news that you're getting better. That
Oh,
they're
I see.
going to be able to decrease the ventilator settings." And that was, I thought it was a hallucination at first. I didn't know if it was real. It wasn't until I was in the rehabilitation recovering that some friends of mine visited and brought some books to read and also a candle from Notre Dame, from the grotto to Our Lady of Lourdes, little chapel there.
Mm.
Um, and his daughter was a student at that time at Notre Dame, and she asked that they pray for me at the grotto to Our Lady of Lourdes. And it was then that I realized it was that image that I saw, and that it wasn't a dream or hallucination, but it was real. I still can't explain it. I think it can't be explained by science. It really can only be explained by faith.
Yeah.
Um, but at that point, I realized I was living and not dead, and that my life needed to have a purpose, a meaning, and that the mandate, there's much to do, was something that I didn't really understand how it could happen because I really didn't have any strength. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even feed myself. But I
Wow.
knew deep down inside, somewhere, somehow, I would find a way to give back, whether it's taking care of patients or in writing this book and giving these talks. So
Yeah. Wow. So, how did your experience influence your beliefs about the afterlife or spirituality?
well, I have to freely admit I was very much afraid of death. I think that's a pretty normal feeling.
Yeah.
But after nearly dying, it no longer made me afraid. Uh, I don't fear death. I know it's a natural part of living. It happens to all of us. But having come close to death, that fear was no longer there. Um, and I realized that we all have a greater purpose. And
Yeah.
it's important that we give back and help others in any way we can. And I, I've dedicated myself since then to doing that.
Wow. That is great. So, you mentioned experiencing fear, hopelessness, and resilience. What were the toughest emotional challenges you faced, and how did you push through them?
Excellent question. Um, when I was off the ventilator and it became apparent that I couldn't move, that I was paralyzed from the neck down, I
Mm.
was diagnosed as having Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a rare but not unheard of complication of a viral pneumonia, or for that matter, any kind of a viral illness. Um, and to that point, my fear had been, not being able to breathe.
Yeah.
And I was waking up at night having nightmares that I couldn't breathe. And then the reality hit home once I was transferred to Spalding Hospital. I was brought to the spinal cord unit. And it was then that I realized that I was moving to a different phase of what was going on with my life at that time, that I was paralyzed.
Mm.
I knew from what the doctors told me and just my own training that I would likely recover, but it would take 6 to 12 months or possibly never to get back to what I was. But I should be able to get back to walking independently, maybe with crutches or a walker, by 6 to 12 months. Um,
Mm.
each day of the physical therapy was arduous. When I was first there in the rehab, I couldn't swallow. I had to
Wow.
be retaught how to swallow. The muscles of my involved in swallowing had to be retrained. As a matter of fact, there are 640 muscles in the body, and pretty much all of my muscles had atrophied from being sick for so long. So it was a Herculean effort to come up with the strategy to rebuild those muscles. And what they did is they divided it up into um, three, 3 hour sessions of therapy: physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And each day was very tedious. I couldn't really do much of anything. I couldn't use my hands. I couldn't swallow. I had to be fed. So I had to basically relearn all of those things that for decades I had taken for granted. Day to day, things didn't change much, but week to week, I could see progress. And I found that if I focused on the future, getting better and getting out of there and resuming my life, that I wouldn't get dragged down into the depths of despair that my situation would have otherwise brought me to. It was easy to see on the spinal cord floor people who were moving forward with their illness and people that were just trapped in a state of shock and disbelief. And they were having a hard time. They were really struggling to move forward. But, my father taught me as a young child never quit. When you get knocked down, pick yourself up, but never ever quit. And so I just channeled that mantra that he gave me as a child. Every day I would just tell myself that. And some days were much more difficult than others, but slowly but surely I got better. After about 4 weeks, they gave me a day pass, and my wife took me out to lunch in a wheelchair to a nearby restaurant that we used to enjoy going to. It was so great. The freedom of being outside of the hospital for the first time in 2 months was just intoxicating. But by the time we had finished lunch and got back to the room, I was totally exhausted. It took all the energy I had just to do that. And I realized that I was not yet ready to go home. And that was hard because I had, in my mind, allowed myself to think that I had gotten well enough to go home. And that day pass was just a prelude to my being released. But it required several more weeks of being in the hospital before I was strong enough to be released. I was still using a wheelchair, and I graduated crutches. And then I had another year of outpatient therapy and got stronger and stronger, and then was able to go back to work part-time and gradually rebuilt myself. Along the way, I had a number of setbacks, a number of illnesses that I ended up in the hospital and complicating my recovery. But with each one, I found the strength to fight back and to remain focused on the future of regaining my life, my independence, getting back to practicing as a physician and helping others. And I kept focusing on that. And that's what helped. The love of my wife, my children, looking to the future, being a physician again and caring for others was what gave me strength to move on. And I think my faith, which was instilled in me when I was young, I hadn't really thought about much, but it really was there for me during these darkest hours of my life. And it's still there.
That's good. So you transitioned from being a physician to a patient. How did this shift your change in perspective on healthcare, both as a provider and a recipient?
Excellent question. Well, being on the other side of the bed, I learned the difference between sympathy and empathy. I was able to empathize with my patients because I had been a patient. I knew what their experience was like. I also knew that what happened during my illness was things that could have been done better. When I was on life support, I couldn't talk, I couldn't move. I could hear, and I could hear quite well because when you're deprived of other senses, the ones you have left become hyperacute. So I could hear most of what was being said to me. And some days my nurses would talk to me. They'd introduce themselves, tell me the day, the time, what they're going to do. The phlebotomist, when they came to draw my blood, would introduce themselves and tell me what they're going to do. And there'd be other times when people would just start doing things and wouldn't tell me what was going on. And it was terrifying. I think knowing now, I would encourage all doctors and nurses to talk to their patients every day, to listen to them. It's very important. Also important to learn body language. I was supposed to have my hip replaced. My hip was My left hip was worn out, and I think that was part of why I got so debilitated and was susceptible to this illness. But one day my wife came in and saw that I'd been repositioned on my left side. One of the things that has to be done when you're on life support in an intensive care unit is your position has to be changed frequently to prevent skin breakdown. So it would take 3 or 4 people to move me, and laying on my hip was extraordinarily painful. My wife came in one day and saw the look on my face and realized I was in pain just by the look on my face. And she called the nurses and said I needed to be repositioned. And I would encourage every physician and every nurse to really learn to read body language, patients' faces, and how they hold themselves. Sometimes the most important thing in a conversation is not what's said, but what isn't said. Patients have a hard time saying everything that's on their mind. And in a very brief interchange of the visit, it's easy to have things left unsaid. So you really need to develop, as a healthcare provider, a very good understanding of how to read a person's face and their body language to get a sense of whether or not there's something that's important that hasn't been said.
So after you going through everything on your own as far as medical crisis, what advice you give to other healthcare professionals about patient care and having empathy for them?
Another excellent question. That's been actually the subject of several of the talks I've given to physicians.
That's great.
I called it, lessons in the art of medicine from nearly being dead, and it's some simple things. Knowing in advance that no matter how difficult your day is going, the patient is having a vastly worse day, and that you need to focus all your attention in listening to what the patient has to say and looking at how their body language, whether or not there's something that's left unsaid. Talk
Wow.
to their families and reassure them about what's going on, not to give false hope, but just
Yeah.
that everything is being done.
Wow. So, like, how has your experience shaped the way you approach medicine today?
I'm more empathetic. Um, I've mastered the art of mindfulness. Part of my rehabilitation, meditation was one of the things I was encouraged to learn. And mindfulness is a very interesting technique that will help you to be a better listener. In mindfulness training, you learn this concept called noting, where if something extraneous is happening, where someone talks to you or your pager goes off, or you just ignore it and file it away to be dealt with later, and all your attention is focused on the patient while you're there with them. It's very important to make patients feel as though they've been heard. And as they get better, understand that the patients have agency and help guide them in the rehabilitation so they get back to the best self that they possibly can be. And encourage them that it's going to be slow, difficult, but essential, and to not give up.
Yeah, it definitely is. So, were there any specific acts of kindness or support that stood out to you during your recovery?
Yes. The When I was in the ICU on life support, there was one nurse who every day she came in, she would tell me her name, tell me the day, the time, and what she was going to do, and she would talk as she took care of me. And the fact that she treated me as a sentient human being really made a big difference.
Mm.
Also, my family visited me every day, and pretty much when I was acutely ill, stayed with me 24 hours a day. They would talk to me, hold my hand, tell me what was going on, pray with me, and it was extremely comforting.
That's good.
And I would encourage all family members, if you got a loved one who's sick in the hospital, visit them. If you can't visit them, call them on the phone, do a video chat, or just even talk. Uh, it's very powerful.
It is.
It's very powerful. Is healing.
Yes.
Talking is part of healing, and being loved is part of healing. These are illnesses are very difficult to go through by yourself. And I think the COVID epidemic showed us how difficult and painful it is for patients to die without family members present. Um, so I think one message would be is to encourage any family member who has a loved one in the hospital to take the time, to make the time to visit or call or in some way let them know you care.
Mm. So what are your biggest lessons you've taken from this experience and that you now apply to your everyday life?
Another excellent question.
Mhm.
um, as I was recovering and getting back to seeing patients again, I did a lot of reading and a lot of introspection. And I realized that you need three things to make a full recovery to the best life possible. First, you have to acknowledge the problem that you are facing. If you can't admit that you have a problem, it's going to be very difficult to move forward. It doesn't matter whether it's an acute life-threatening near-death experience as I had, or it's diabetes or high blood pressure or whatever. You have to be able to acknowledge that this is what you face, and the next step is accept. So acknowledge is the first step. The second step is acceptance. You need to accept it. Getting angry about it doesn't help. It's a waste of energy, emotional energy, and doesn't really help you move forward. Denial doesn't work either. So acknowledge the problem, accept the problem, and the final piece, in many ways the hardest piece, is to adapt, to find a way to do what's necessary to move forward. When I was on the spinal cord floor in recovery, um, they first got me into an electric wheelchair, and I'd never really thought much about that. But I realized when you're paralyzed, the ability to be mobile, to get around, to be independent with an electric wheelchair is extraordinarily powerful. To be accepting of others who have disabilities and limitations, accept them as they are. Don't pity them. Just accept them for who they are and help them any way you can is important.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely important. With you going through all of this, and I know you advocate for a lot of things when it comes to you reaching your near death experience. How has your experience been talking to other physicians, other doctors, and have they really took your advice And have you seen a shift in their behavior or how they approach things a lot differently? Did it give them enough insight and reality to what you've been through?
I think the feedback from the physicians and the nurses that I've given talks to has been overwhelmingly positive. I think they all
That's good.
really were, I think, surprised in some ways how valuable and important it was to talk to patients and explain what you're doing, what's going on, where
Mm,
things are. It doesn't take a lot of time,
yeah, it
but it's
doesn't.
a very powerful thing. And I do believe that maybe not everybody, but many of the doctors and nurses and therapists that have come up to me afterwards or written to me saying how much it's changed the way they care for patients.
That's good. How do you feel about that?
I feel really good. I when I wrote the book, I thought it was going to be mostly patients and family members of patients who are critically ill that would get the most out of this.
Hmm.
But now it seems that the overwhelming number of people that have been reaching out to me, calling me, sending me emails, or on my website telling me how valuable the book has been to them and how much they appreciated the talk that I gave. I think, as I said earlier, you go through life extremely, as a physician, extremely busy. You start your day maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, seeing patients. You're bombarded with calls from nurses, from patients, other physicians, constantly distracted, and it's very easy to not be fully present when you're with
Amen.
the patient, and it's really crucially important to be fully present with the patient when you're with them and caring for them.
Yes. That is so true. And I am like so happy that you are sharing this because it gives a lot of people insight as being a patient and being a doctor because I've never been a doctor, but being a patient, sometimes you do want some sort of empathy when it comes to some doctors. And I know they have their own life experiences and even experiences with different types of patients with different characters. And just the fact that you're sharing this, you could give some insight for someone to truly understand or actually have some sort of heart somewhere for them to understand what a person is going through or what they've been through as far as them suffering an illness while being a patient. And just having that brings a lot of closure to both parties and just getting to know them a lot more and gaining an understanding because feeling like a doctor cares it's a relief, honestly. It really is.
I have to say, having been on both sides of the bed, it's absolutely crucial. And it's one of the most important lessons that I stress in talking to physicians and nurses, that they can make such a difference by being fully present when they're there with the patient. It doesn't take an hour. A couple of minutes is really, just to acknowledge the patient where they are, acknowledge their agency in dealing with whatever issue there is crucial in helping that patient get through whatever it is that they're facing.
Yeah. And so now that you have written a book and you've been an advocate for so many things, where does your life stand right now with everything that you have going
I
on?
have a full life. My wife and I are, you know, traveling, seeing our children, staying fully active, doing everything that we can, and we're both more fully alive after going through this, because we realize that life is temporary. You never know when things are going to be turned completely upside down, or with an illness or an accident or sudden death. So you live every day to the fullest, and you care and you love the people that you care and love about fully, unconditionally every day, and you let them know that. You treat others with respect. Caring for one another is the greatest gift we can.
Yeah, that is amazing. So, how can someone purchase your book?
Well, it's for sale on Amazon, probably the easiest way to get it, but it's also available in a number of bookstores. It's Physician, Heal Thyself, Nearly Dead, and the Journey Back to Health by Michael Hession, MD. You can search either by my name or type in the title. Amazon usually delivers it within a day or so, and I think many bookstores, I think many Barnes and Noble bookstores carry it, but Amazon's probably the fastest way to get it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Michael. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your testimony and actually like shedding light to being a patient and a doctor on the other side. And I just wish that you continue to touch many individuals and let them understand a lot more so we can have a easy and better process when people are in situations like this, because it is so important. And just, I'm honored to even have you on my podcast to even share it, because I know my listeners are definitely going to love this.
Well, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Life Her Podcast. Could you please subscribe on YouTube and also listen to Life Her Podcast on all major audio platforms? Have a blessed day.
Welcome to Life Her Podcast, the podcast that guides you from the 9-to-5 grind to the freedom of your own path. Discover how to conquer life's challenges while pursuing your passions with unwavering faith. Because being an entrepreneur is not easy. So let's get to it.